After 4 decades living and working in the circumpolar world of Canada's far north, explorer and author James Raffan made an unusual choice for his new book. In order to help people truly understand the reality and science of what's at stake there, for polar bears and for people, he's written not a textbook or a polemic, but an imaginative work that hitches a ride with a most remarkable protagonist. The book is called Ice Walker, a polar bear's journey through the fragile Arctic, and it brings James Raffan back to our airwaves tonight from Kingston, Ontario. And it's so good to have you back on this program. I don't think you've been on TVO. We're certainly not on our program for about 13 years, so it's great to see you again.
Still alive, Steve. Great to see you. Good evening.
We're both still hanging in there, I guess. Okay, good. I want to start by just reading an excerpt of the book, and then we'll come back and chat. So, Sheldon, if you would, let's bring this graphic up, and away we go. The story that follows has its genesis in my belief that the intertwining worlds of northern bears and northern peoples offer deep wisdom that the rest of us could use to adjust our behavior in response to climate change. In spite of unanimity in the scientific community about its existence and graphic evidence of its accelerating effects on our lives through flooding, sea level rise, forest fires, and increased catastrophic weather events around the world, very little of what we see and hear seems to translate into action. I want to just start there. Why do you think that's the case, that very little is translating into action?
I think we've created, and I'll indict myself with everybody, I think we've created generations of very smart consumers and polluters. And it was actually, after 20-something books I've written and edited that were aimed at the front part of people's brains, Steve, I've done script writing for a bunch of very creative filmmakers, and I realized that in that amalgam, that incredible amalgam of sound and image and idea, filmmakers aren't aiming so much at your head as they are at your heart, and I'm convinced more so than ever that we don't act on what we know, we act on what we feel. And I wondered what a book might look like that was aimed at somebody's heart first.
Well, I can tell you, mission accomplished, because this book really does aim right at your heart. You tell the story of how do I put this? You've sort of, you've made up the story of a fictitious bear, but of course all the details of the story are true. And I wonder how you hope, by using that story and getting us to sort of fall in love with that polar bear, how you hope that might change behavior.
Well, the last line of my last book, called Circling the Midnight Sun, is "We are the bear," and that was sort of a side shot on Al Gore's amazing 28 seconds of video in An Inconvenient Truth, with a bear swimming around in a warming sea looking for a place to call home. And I think we are the bear. But bear images have been used to sell, cars, consulting, cameras, Coca-Cola, cough drops, conservation. It doesn't seem to matter. So they're already the poster child, the poster cub for climate change in the Arctic. And it does bug me a little bit that most of those images are presenting bears in an unpeopled wilderness, because the Arctic is not unpeopled by any means. But bears are already in people's consciousness. And I thought, what about going to the bear and going much deeper into the bear's life, because so that people might really, all I wanted to do, and it's easier to say than it is to do, I wanted to create a space in which people could consider themselves, ourselves, like it's a portrait of humanity in 30 months in the life of a bear, in the hope that that space might be a different context or opportunity to ponder how we live our lives.
I'm just going to take this moment to ask our director, Sheldon Osmond. Sheldon, sort of top third of page 2, we've got the bear and Coke. And since it was just referenced, let's bring that up right now. Coca-Cola has very effectively used the cuddly polar bear to sell more Coca-Cola. And, even when we used to be allowed to go to movies and these commercials would come on and people would get all misty-eyed when they saw those heart-tugging ads that they put on. But the question I want to ask is, they're using polar bears, but are they actually helping polar bears? Is corporate Canada, is the corporate world contributing to helping polar bears at all?
Well, I presume it is because they wouldn't use bears so aggressively in advertising. And Coca-Cola, to their credit, I suppose, made some sort of arrangement and deal with the World Wildlife Fund to create a project called Arctic Home. And you may remember polar bears were actually on cans of different types of Coca-Cola and at least in this market. And some of the proceeds of that went to conservation work. Um, I don't know what the answer to that is, but it does. I mean, those ads, the Arctic Home Project really bothered me because you could go into the website having had your Coca-Cola and it would talk about Arctic Home and you could adopt a polar bear and you could learn a lot of interesting things about polar bears, but it didn't acknowledge that Arctic is home for 4 million people around the circumpolar world, and that kind of bugged me. But I have waded into this territory, Steve, in the hope that people might consider that, but go beyond the sort of two-dimensional or three-dimensional notion of a bear as a cuddly fellow mammal denizen of the beautiful frozen and threatened north.
Well, I guess you could have chosen any animal you wanted to make the point that you want to make, but you did choose the polar bear. How come?
Well, it brings in another thread in the motivation here, and that is that as a kid growing up on the banks of the mighty Speed River in Guelph, Ontario, I really, really wanted to be a marine biologist. And the stuff of my childhood reading and adventures was imagining me as out there doing research. And that led me to a substantive experience as a young biologist doing an analysis of the spectral sensitivity of a polar bear in a closed and dark room at the University of Guelph. And that I left that. I have felt terrible since then. And I hold a debt to that bear whose number was Canadian Wildlife Service 007, but his name was Huxley, named by my now deceased colleague Robin Best for his godfather Julian Huxley. But I have felt through, that was in the mid-70s, and I've felt since then that I needed to atone somehow to Huxley for abandoning him in a cage at the University of Guelph.
What happened to Huxley eventually?
Well, he became study skin in the vertebrate anatomy lab at the University of Guelph, and a couple of years ago I got a remarkable honor and opportunity, which was an invitation from the president of the university to come to address the graduating class in biological sciences, which is kind of funny. But I had to fess up there, and they said, I was there for a couple of days, and they said, what would you like to do when you're here? And I said, well, this bear in the 70s, da-da-da-da. Anyway, at 3:30 on this day, I went to the vertebrate anatomy lab, and there was the chief demonstrator, and there was a bear that I recognized, a bear skin of a bear that I recognized, which I have to say is one of the most surreal moments of my life.
I'll bet. I want to talk to you a bit now about the three-letter word that is in the title of this book, and that frankly is a huge character in this book, which is the word ice. So let's start with the title, Ice Walker. There's a double entendre there. Why don't you tell us about it?
Well, we are the bear in a lot of ways. We are walking on thin ice. Curiously, Steve, and this is where the beauty of the editorial collaboration comes in, I wrote this book over years as Walking Ice. And it was the good marketing people and my editorial confreres and collaborators at Simon & Schuster who convinced me that this needed to be a noun, ice walker. And so that's where it came from. I love the simplicity of the idea, but the connection between bear and ice and footprints and all of that comes together Because a bear, I mean, it's Ursus maritimus. This is a sea bear, and they need ice, and and the ice is disappearing. So, and I love that you have identified the ice as a character because it is. It's a living, breathing thing in the story.
And that ice, that character, is disappearing from the life of polar bears. And I guess we need to get a better understanding of how much of that is our fault. Why don't we start there? How much of the fact that this is disappearing is our fault?
Well, I would say the majority of it. If you believe in anthropogenic climate change, and you look at the length of the winter available to, for example, the polar bear populations in southwestern Hudson Bay, the length of the winter, the length of time in which ice is on the bay is diminishing markedly since the Industrial Revolution. And we've kept closer tabs on the actual number of days that there is ice available for hunting, more so in the last 4 decades than previous time before that, going back to the 19th century. But bears are creatures of the ice is disappearing, and I don't care how you slice it, that is a problem for the ice walker.
How much of the problem stems from too much hunting?
I would say, I mean, there are people who argue about this more than anything, but my argument in the book is that in order to understand and to consider one species like the polar bear, you need to understand that that bear is integrated into the lives of northern peoples. And to suggest that somehow hunting is for subsistence hunting, to suggest that that is somehow causing the disappearance of the polar bear, I would disagree vehemently that that is the case. Now, there are people who want to point to that and say, no, this is not possible. But I think conservation, as it needs to move forward, the idea of a conservation economy, I think it needs to have people written into the conservation algorithm, because that people, landscape, and natural phenomena are totally interrelated. So to pull out the polar bear and say we need to support this, I would argue that we also need to consider ways to perpetuate the cultures and practices and traditions and family community practices of northern peoples whose lives have been integrated with the polar bear since time began.
I totally take your point on that, and let's acknowledge right now that here's two white guys talking about indigenous culture and the integration of the polar bear in that culture for thousands and thousands of years. Having said that, I think I read in your book that there's 25,000 polar bears left in total. And I'm just asking the question. I don't know the answer. Do we have to do something? Maybe it's a moratorium. I don't know, in order to protect them more when they seem so very vulnerable to extinction right now.
I don't think you will find a more cogent conservation scheme than a conservation scheme or agenda that is written by and with northern people who understand bears as well as scientists, but in very, very different ways. And we need to work together to do that. But the threat, I mean, it's not northern peoples who are making the winter shorter. And let's face it, Steve, a bear does not eat, I mean, it needs fat of seals, whether they're bearded seals or ringed seals. It needs marine mammal fat. Bears don't drink fresh water. They survive on metabolic water, which is it's like you burn your fire to make your s'mores. The carbon in wood turns into carbon dioxide in water. Bears burn fat, seal fat, to create carbon dioxide in water that they use for all their water needs. But they need to get a certain amount of fat on board so that they can go ashore. And in the days when the summer was 2 months long, no problem fasting for 2 months. Even harder when you're a pregnant female. But when the summer is 6 months long and you don't come ashore with enough fat, that's a problem. And that is a problem that is not being caused by northern hunting, northern peoples integrated with it. It's a problem that is caused by the shortening of the winter, which in my book is caused by all of the anthropogenic climate change factors that we're so incredibly clever about, but yet don't seem to be able to integrate into our lives in a way that makes much difference.
Gotcha. I want to read something else that you wrote. This is not from the book Ice Walker. This is from a piece you did for the Globe and Mail not too long ago. And here we go. Sheldon, bring this up if you would. If we lose the polar bears, we are also losing the very thing that many would argue distinguishes us from animals in the first place: the ability to choose our paths, to have rational dominion over our animalistic instincts, to enact the human wherewithal, to put morality into action, and to create a better version of the world we live in. By choosing not to alter our behavior in any meaningful way, despite all evidence pointing to how destructive it is, we are losing part of what it means to be human. And I wonder as well, James, whether, given that probably 2/3 of the world's polar bears live in Canada, whether we Canadians have a special responsibility to deal with this. What do you think?
Gee, that sounds like a rant.
I was kind of teeing you up for one.
Yeah, well, I want to be the Canadian and say, I'm sorry I said that. I'm not sorry I said that. And what do we have a special responsibility? Yes, I think we do. But and this is one of the reasons why when our politicians reach out to other governments, to other leaders, global leaders, to create solutions, that makes me very happy. And we can talk more about that if you like. But we polar bears are alive and well in our consciousness, and I think we have a lot of people in the north who know polar bears. And so yes, I think if we bear, it's almost like an opportunity that Canadians have, because the preponderance of polar bears are in this country. But I think we have an opportunity here to show leadership as we are, and in coming forward with complex and integrated cross-cultural solutions to finding policies and finding laws and governance strategies that will take us forward together. And in the Canadian example, I think, is quite powerful in that respect, because a lot of people turn to us in the Middle Earth, if you like, turn to us for that kind of leadership because we are a northern nation.
I know you said it in your last book, but you do repeat it in this book as well, near the back. And I'll just read a couple of lines of it. You say, by better understanding the bear, we better understand ourselves. We can do better. We must do better. We are the bear, as my northern friends have known all along. Most of us in this country, though, live within 2 hours of the American border. We'll never see a polar bear in our lives. And I wonder whether you think it's a tough sell to convince people that they ought to care about something that is so out of sight and out of mind. How tough a sell is that?
Well, Steve, you and I both have PCBs circulating in our bodies. We have heavy metals. We have experienced catastrophic climate events. We are living in a world where the seasons are shifting as a result of climate change. And we are carrying with us already, those of us in North America, images of polar bears already. So I really am hoping that by animating the idea of a polar bear as us, we might consider that those issues the bear is facing are our issues, but also not that far away. The world is getting smaller. Polar Bears International they were just on Twitter yesterday showing that they've got new broadcast facilities for polar bear cams. They're doing amazing work. So is the World Wildlife Fund. In not only supporting important scientific research, but also in bringing the sort of the circumstance of the bear closer to the marketplace. And it's just not that far. But that question that you ask is one that really resonates rattles around in my head too about, why should we care when those things are that far away? And I mean, the title of my last book, Circling the Midnight Sun, had a subtitle that was climate and talked about the invisible Arctic. And the invisible Arctic, in my mind, are the people who live there. And that book was really an amplification tool for the voices that I heard in 3 years going around the circle. And in a way, bears don't talk. I didn't want them to talk, but in a way, Ice Walker is another amplification of 40 years of listening to, let's call it, the voices of the bear and the bear people in the Arctic. And this is me as a writer trying to bring those voices here and to make them present. And I think making them present and simplifying the story was why the creation of this book took so damn long.
Well, I'm glad you stuck it out because it's worth reading. Let me raise, you raised some political issues not too long ago, and I want to return to those because the Prime Minister of the country did receive an award from National Geographic, and we have the tweet actually of it here. It says, in recognition of his leadership in the protection of Canada's marine and terrestrial life, we are pleased to present Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada with the Planetary Leadership Award. And I'd be curious as to what your view of that recognition is.
Well, I'm always a little bit dubious. I mean, quite often these sort of grand gestures are as much about shedding light on the sponsoring organization, the strivings of the sponsoring organizations. They are about the fine qualities of the recipients, maybe with Goldman or Nobel left out of that. But having said that, I think I would give Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister Trudeau, a medal for not being Stephen Harper in the early days. But in this case, the recognition, and it was interesting to see it come forward, that it actually highlighted the agreement that the government of Canada came up with, the Kikitani Inuit Association and the government of Nunavut, to create Talarutuyap-Amanga, and I've mangled that, but the Lancaster Sound Marine Protected Area, which is nearly 500,000 square kilometers of area. And I have to say, I mean, if you look at the numbers in Prime Minister Trudeau's time, and yeah, it's hard. Governing is way more complex than saying you're going to govern. And I don't want to be the Prime Minister, and I wish him well with all of the things that he's dealing with. But in the marine protected area, he's brought us from, 1% to about 13 or 14% of and this is huge. And in the terrestrial areas, he's brought us forward there too.
I don't want to get overly bogged down in the politics of all of this. However, you did take a little drive-by smear at Stephen Harper there, and I think it's fair to say Stephen Harper probably went to the far north more than any prime minister in Canadian history, and certainly moved along the idea of a northern university. And to the extent that he's remembered for one policy in particular, I think you could make an argument that it was his commitment to the far north that it'd be somewhere high up that list. So how come that doesn't seem to resonate with you?
Touche. The image of that prime minister standing on the bow of a Canadian naval vessel that can't go through ice is just a classic situation. And yeah, maybe it was a touch unfair, but the science that is being brought into the building of the conservation economy that are part of the Talarutuyap-Amanga project, there is, I see this government treating that type of data, that type of policy making resource differently than the previous government. And, who am I to chirp from the shores of Cranberry Lake at some of these politicians, because I do admire them in the fortitude in going forward. And I guess I would have to reluctantly say I even admire Stephen Harper for working with the courage of his convictions.
There you go. All the conservatives watching us are going to be happy now. Okay, good. James, let's do one more thing here, and that is, there are a lot of neat, fun facts, if I can call them that one learns when reading your book, and you're so captivated by the story, you're almost taking in this information by osmosis. You don't even realize you're learning something. Do you want to hit us with one or two just before we wrap this up? I
started with polar bear vision, Steve, and when you think about a a creature, an animal. Think about ourselves. That animal can hunt in 24-hour darkness and blinding 24-hour light. Think of the spring in the Arctic, in March and April when you're coming off the equinox towards the solstice, and it's brilliant 24-hour light. This bear can function in both of those light conditions. It actually has a third eyelid that may serve as a sunglass or an underwater vision. It can hunt underwater. That's absolutely amazing. The fact that, and I mentioned this before, the fact that they can live without drinking fresh water. I mean, the ice that they walk on is largely fresh, but eating ice is energetically a waste because it's just like if you or I get thirsty when we're out skiing and eat snow. Your body spends as much energy heating it up as it does on anything else. But the whole birth process, Steve, where there is delayed conception. So mating happens on the ice at one time in the year, and then several months later, the conceptus, which is the genetic material from the male and the female, which has been kind of in suspended animation in the womb of the female. It's months later when the female comes ashore and builds a den, and if she is physiologically able and right and to do that, and then magically, I'm not a scientist anymore, and not that I ever. Let's call it magically. The conceptus keeps developing. Then there's the whole olfactory pheromonal messaging that goes into the tracks of the bear. There's the fact that when and then the relationship between bears and people in the mythology and cosmology of the North. That a polar bear's back foot goes into its front footstep, which is energetically a great thing because you're not breaking as much snow. But on the other hand, it looks like the bear is walking on its hind legs. And I'm quite sure, Steve, I have never actually seen this with my own eyes, but I'm quite sure that bears do when nobody's looking, and they do that. And maybe they even dance.
I do have to say, the scene that you describe in the book of the bears mating will stay with me for a while. That was a rather terrifying description. Anyway, James Raffan, it's so good to have you back on our program. The name of the book is Ice Walker, A Polar Bear's Journey Through the Fragile Arctic. And you be well, sir, and we'll hope to see you again much sooner than was the case last time.
Lovely to talk with you, Steve. Good evening.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.